came from Ireland when he was 15 years old. Him and his twin brother. They went to work in the Black Rock mine at 15 years old, and they lived with one of my aunts, Mrs. Dennehy, that lived on East Center Street in Centerville. They worked long enough to pay back the stewards, which at that time was, they had to pay $125 back for this, what it cost them to bring them over here. Then in turn, when they got enough money, they sent for the next ones, and the same thing went with the English and all the rest of the people that came to this country. You had to be sponsored by somebody of your family. So that's how most of my dad's 8 brothers and 5 sisters all made it to Butte, Montana. But I was born and raised, like I say, up on Missoula Avenue. And in 1928, my father bought the house on the corner of Main and Pacific, where we live now, where I was born and raised. The house was owned by Carbide O'Donnell. I have no idea what his first name or real name was, but there's no nicknames. He was Carbide O'Donnell. Where I live right now, there's an empty lot in front of my house. That lot had the Eagle Bar, one of many bars in Centerville. The last time I gave this talk at the archives, I walked from my front door down to Main Street. This is in September of 1932. I'm heading for St. Lawrence's School. So on my way up Main Street, I will describe what was there when I was a kid. The first house next door to me was Emma and Sam Eustace, Cornish people. Next door was Cronley's, Irish. McGree's was next, Irish. O'Donnell's, then Hooper's Paint, then Billy McCarthy, Irish barber, then Irish, the Ancient Order Hibernians Hall. On the corner was Mark Belange's little grocery candy store. So I'll detour and go up Center Street, west on Center Street. Where the Ant House is today, where the bar was known as the Ant House, or Rooms, or all these other names. When I was a kid, it was Garfield and Ozzie Turgidge's Butcher Shop. They were both lived there. If you go down the street below the Butcher Shop, which was Sutter Street, Simons's, Tervena's, Turgidge's, and Angles. Everybody's right from Cornwall. All the people on that street were from Cornwall. At the end of the street, I've been at Angle's house, was a clubhouse called the Snake House. There was Doug Angle, his brother, there was Winnie Tervena, there was Bill Simons, Spooky Hislop. Now these are nicknames at the Centerville at that time. Spooky Hislop, Richie Hallman. They were all members of that gang. Not a gang, but a clubhouse. They had a nice clubhouse there. They'd invite you in, but if you try to sneak in, why, the main thing in them days, and like people that were raised up there like Jack and nice guys, they'd pants you. You'd hang your pants off one of the light posts up there. But getting back onto Center Street, we'll go up Center Street, and then Hislop's lived the next house, then Turgidge's house, Ozzie Turgidge's house. His wife had a beauty shop there. Then the next place was Casey, Mrs. Casey. During the, when they had, what do you call it, they couldn't drink beer and that when they had Prohibition. Why, there was an old saying, the moon shines east, the moon shines west, but Mrs. Casey made the moon shine best. They said, knock on the back door, hand her a pint bottle or a half pint. She'd fill it up, you give her 50 cents, take it home. You know, in them days, why, working in the mines, everybody had to have a little cachet when they come home, a little drink. So my dad used to always drain it through the cheesecloth. I'll tell you couldn't believe some of the things that come out on that cheesecloth. Next door to Casey's going west was a little candy store owned by Joe James, Josiah Joe James. His wife was Polly, and Wabi was the one son, and Betty was the daughter. people maybe do not know, but Josiah Joseph James was a survivor of the speculator fire. Well, he was next. His daughter today, when we dedicated the monument up at the speculator, we got in contact with Betty. She lives in Washington. She's an ordained minister, but she's retired now. And I don't know whether they found out whether Bobby was still alive. They were trying to come here, but they didn't make it. But she was supposed to come here to see the monument. And then next door to them, you had Bess, and then Colonel Little John lived there. And across the street, we had Art Gary. Next door to him was Driscoll and Florine's. Then we had Richie Holmes' mother. Then you had, the next house was Thomas's. If anybody knew Jackie Thomas and Betty, the mother, the dad worked at the Anselmo. He used to come home at night and he'd walk up from the Anselmo up to Excelsior and up to Missoula Avenue and in down to the house there on Center Street, and he'd knock, he'd open the door, and everybody in Centerville remembered. He'd say, "I'm home, Lil. Supper ready?" Then the next house was Rundle's, and then the Carolines. Art Caroline, Roy Caroline, Bill Caroline, and their two sisters. Next door to that, we come to the corner, we got the Sons of St. George's Hall. Sons of St. George's Hall downstairs had a grocery store, a department store. It was owned by this fellow. You can pass it around. That's Gilbert Bennett. I found an election card when he ran for county assessor. He owned the department store on the corner of Main and Center. He also owned the store on the South Side Hardware. He owned that building. His brother owned a part of the Walkerville Coal and Feed, which was run by Western Fuel. It was right where the present Blaine School is right now. It was that. He had all kinds of people working for him. He had a regular department store on the second floor. The first floor was a grocery store, but he had my godmother, who was Maggie Shea, worked in that department store, but she died real young. But anyway, going on up across the flat street, the Trinity Methodist Church. Reverend Spencer was the pastor of that church when I was a kid. He was one of the most wonderful men I've ever had the pleasure to know. He was really a great man. And him and Father McDonald from St. Lawrence's used to sit on the porch up there at St. Lawrence's. There was no word up there in front of the St. Lawrence priest's house. The two of them used to sit there looking towards the west and talking and smoking them big Havana cigars about that. Strong. They were great friends. They were great friends. And then Father Rooney was brought up to St. Lawrence's as assistant for Father McDonald. And then the three of them were great. They were really great. Reverend Mr. Spencer was really a wonderful man. But on the Platte Street, going west, the first house was Prophet's, Henry Prophet. He was a carpenter on the hill. Then Plug Sullivan. Then Quick's, Bobby Quick. And his sister was married to Art. Jerry. Bobby Quick was my age. He went into service when I did in World War II, but he stayed. He didn't come back out. He made a career out of being in the Navy. He was a submariner. He was under Nautilus when she went under the ice cap. One of the first guys in Butte that ever was on the Nautilus and went under the ice cap. Then you went on farther over and there was different houses, but always most likely a lot of people will remember Billy Gilbert. He lived on the Platte Street there, and he was great man, like a humanitarian. He was always visiting the sick, and him and the Reverend Mitchell from Walkerville used to always go together, visit the miners' wards, and he was really a great guy. And then down on the end of the street was Spotty Williams, who Jim most likely He was an electrician for the Anaconda Company. Then was the Blaine School, but everybody figured the Blaine School was the only school in Centerville. But in 1883, on the end of Mullen Street, was the Adams School, the first elementary public school in the city of Butte, Montana, was in Centerville, right on the end of Mullen Street, on the east end of Mullen Street. In 1889, they built the Blaine School, which was on now an empty lot. But that was the first school, was in Centerville. You know, Walkerville and Centerville were here a long time before Butte was. And the people up there considered Butte a suburb of Walkerville and Centerville. We still do today. And right across from the Blaine School was T.J. Bennett's beautiful home. It still sits there on the corner where you make the turn into Walkerville, corner of Bennett and Main Street. Different people lived there. One of the Mr. Chagru, who was one of the daughters of Mrs. Harrington that ran the Mountain House, she lived there in later years. And there's a lady there now by the name of Shea lives there now. But going, you know, there's a dividing line between Centerville and Walkerville, and the fire departments had mutual assistance. Centerville and Walkerville, so they split the street. The lower part of Bennett Street is Centerville. The upper part of Bennett Street is Walkerville. So when there was a fire, both trucks went to the fire. But that's always was a mutual aid. The second house in from the corner, a guy by the name of Chazzy Keogh lived there with his mom and dad and sister. Chazzy just died here not too long ago. But as Jack knows, some of the people that knew him, he was quite gifted with his hands. He was a pretty fair boxer. So, being want to know how to take care of yourself when we were kids, you know, why he says, well, we'll have a boxing school. Okay. So Tucker McGree and myself and Emmett Sullivan and a whole bunch of us, Jack Downey, and we all went up there anyway. The first thing we got to do was go into training. When you look around the yard, he had about 4 sawbucks and a great big yard full of wooden posts, trees. We're going to saw them. That was what we're going to do. We're going to saw the wood. That's where we're going to get in shape. Big cross-cut, double-handed cross-cut, you know, long and strong. I had yard work, and you know, every day we had to do a little saw the wood, saw the wood. 3 weeks we had every piece of the wood sawed. We had it all split and stacked. No more boxing school. You're all ready. What a con job.